Between 1918 and 1920, some 50 million people died worldwide, including 650,000 here in the United States. One scholar called it the worst thing to hit the world since the Black Death.
When we talk about what's happening now with COVID-19 pandemic, everyone is looking back in time to the 1918 flu pandemic. And one of those historians who's doing it is Tim Kiska. He's joining me now. He's also a professor at the University of Michigan, Dearborn, longtime reporter and writer for the newspapers here in town. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Pretty good, Christy. How are you?
Good. Talk to me a little bit about the podcast that you did here, the Detroit History Podcast you've been doing for a while, but you specifically look back now at the 1918 flu pandemic and really what happened in Detroit and the waves that came after. Go ahead and tell me about when you first started thinking, this is what I'm going to delve into and do a podcast on this.
Well, I had in my files, some old clips from 1918, 1919 describing these horrific problems where Ford Motor Company was literally loaning out cars because there weren't enough ambulances. And it sort of sat in my files for probably 5 years. This thing hits, and I thought, wait a minute, we've been to this dance, unfortunately, before. So I wanted to find out what happened in 1918, 1919, 1920. Not only how did we react, but what did we learn from that? And the world was obviously way different in those years. But still, I wanted to find out what happened exactly. How did that roll out in this town?
We were caught up in wartime fervor. Lots of people moving around, many from military bases. The Motor City had all of the ingredients for fueling a pandemic.
So you took how many weeks did it take you? And then what are the sources that you went to?
Probably roughly about a month. The sources, I have a fistful of old City of Detroit Health Department bulletins where they recorded some of this stuff. I was looking at old Detroit Free Presses, old Detroit Newses. I interviewed a guy named J. Alex Navarro, who's a medical historian out of the University of Michigan, excellent, and also a guy named Matthew Daly out of Grand Valley State University, who's been looking at this for years and years and years with his class. And I also had this reporter, Christy McDonald, taking me through and reading through the archives. I mean, actually reading what was in the newspaper at that time.
Yeah, I was able to help voice some of those things as well. And our One Detroit senior producer, Bill Kubota, works with you on these podcasts as well, right?
That's right.
So when you started to take a look, and again, our world is very different in terms of contagion, in terms of the ability that we have to be able to get around the world and the spread of a pandemic. But what kind of parallels did you find between what happened in 1918 and then the 2 years following and kind of where we are now?
Well, one thing that struck me was at one point, it started getting really bad. We're talking about October 1918. And the governor, Albert Sleeper, is seeing, oh my God, this is spreading everywhere. So he's thinking, we got to close this place down. And there was all kinds of pushback from people for a variety of different reasons. One, James Inches, who was the City of Detroit Health Department chief, was saying, wait a minute, this is going to, if we close everything down, there's going to be hysteria. So there was a closure from about October 19th to November 2nd, but people went out in the streets in massive numbers, particularly right after Armistice Day.
We may have thought we were finished with the flu, but the Spanish flu was not finished with us. Armistice Day, November 11th, 1918. The war was over, and there was a great parade. Here's Detroit Public Television's Christy McDonald reading from the pages of the Detroit Free Press, November 12th, 1918.
Cadillac Square could not begin to furnish a suitable outlet for the crowds. Grand Circus Park, Washington Boulevard, Broadway, Michigan Avenue, and all the streets in the city were taxed to hold the great masses of humanity when the crowd overflowed the campus and City Hall Square before noon.
People got really sick in massive numbers. We're talking in that wave, 1,800 dead. And by the way, that number might be even a little low, because if somebody came in, when you read these health department bulletins, they say flat out, somebody comes wheeled into the emergency room, they've got cancer and the Spanish flu, they die, they're written off as a cancer death. Why? I don't know. But so the numbers are probably higher.
I think what's really interesting that you looked at was the different waves, because we are in what we can only assume is the first wave of COVID-19. That, the experts are looking out saying, look, if we don't take in certain accounts, there is going to be a second wave. It's just going to be a matter of what that looks like.
Yes, and sad but true. As we mentioned, there were 4 different waves here. There was one in the spring of 1918, another heavy one in the fall of 1918, another one in 1919. The final one was January 20th. So do the math. We're talking a year, 3 months, a year, 4 months later. And what Navarro, who's an expert at this thing, says, what it does is it goes away for a little while and then it comes back, and a lot of people are immune, so they don't get sick, but a lot of people aren't immune and they get sick, and it keeps going and it keeps on going until it finally just sort of another strain comes in and kind of bumps that out, unfortunately.
I think what's interesting is you're not the only one who's looking back in history and the reactions of the time during a pandemic. You had also referenced that the LA Times had done something taking a look at how Los Angeles reacted in San Francisco, and really the tale of 2 cities when people were very extreme and shutting things down, and one city that did not.
Yeah, exactly. And, in the pushback, you get that. I totally understand it, because you've got people, the place, the deli where I get my corned beef sandwiches, I don't know, for sure, but these people have been working for decades upon decades, to build that business up and do a good business. And then poof, it's melting away before their eyes. So you can see why people are really anxious to get back. It's totally understandable. On the other hand, what you learn from the Spanish flu, and God knows medicine's a lot better, a lot different, but those are the realities right there, as they were 100 years ago.
And so I guess what's the biggest surprise that you were able to pull out of this for you personally when you started researching?
What surprised me is, okay, I'm hearing all of the discussion about why are we closing this town down? Why are we closing the state down? Why can't I take my boat out? That sort of thing. Well, we were dealing with that a long time ago. And by the way, 100 years ago, there were a lot of places that did not shut down. They just said, you can't make me. You can't do that. Bear in mind also, 100 years ago, the federal government was not what it is now. The federal government really didn't start getting big until really, we're talking the 30s and the 40s. So, I mean, there was no real federal response that you could count on, because there wasn't a federal government really that was equipped to deal with this. That's sort of a relatively recent thing.
So, we're always, if we're not learning from history, we're destined to repeat it. What has been, in terms of the reaction of this podcast? And I know that you've been podcasting for quite a while, but this specific subject matter.
I think people wanted to hear the facts, and they still want to hear the facts. Now, the woman at my friend at the deli, I mean, she's saying, yeah, I get that, but then I'm seeing my business blow up. So in general, it was very positive. I got a couple people who said this was a vast one world conspiracy. So this was, and that's out there, by the way.
I was just going to say that is out there, and you can find it everywhere on social media.
Absolutely. The latest is there's a video that's going viral. It was a TV news report out of Bakersfield, California. A couple of docs who are urgent care physicians, sitting there in blue scrubs and saying, look, this is an overreaction. Actually, everything is fine. And you kind of go, well, maybe they're fine in Bakersfield because that particular county encompasses the Mojave Desert. But all I can tell you is it sure ain't fine here in this town or in this state or in New York or a lot of other places.
So tell us where we can find the podcast.
www.detroithistorypodcast, just one word.com. You go into Apple Podcast, it's there pretty much everywhere at finer podcast stores everywhere.
There you go. Right. And as a news guy and as a professor of journalism and history, man, we are going to be writing some interesting interesting stories here about Detroit, even looking back when they look back at this 50 years from now. What's your assessment, Tim, as you kind of look at this
Okay, I'm just a guy with a double-digit IQ. I think that this is a world-changing event. I mean, if you look at the French Revolution, this is not an original thought. Once they started the French Revolution, it wasn't like, oh, we're in the middle of the French Revolution. It was later that they figured, oh, my God. So I think this has got the possibility. I mean, this could go, let's put it this way, to steal a phrase from Body Heat, there are 100 ways this thing could end. And you're a genius if you could think of 20 of them. I don't know how it's going to end, but I think that whatever this is, it's every facet of life. The deli shop, if you're, Tiger baseball, are people going to be coming back to the games in mass numbers? Don't know. What I do at U of M Dearborn, love that place. What about the students? Are they going to come back? How many of them are out of work? I mean, my students all work. They do stuff like working, tending bar or making pizzas. They're out of work. How many of their parents out of work? So you sit there and go, I mean, this is changing every facet of life, and where it's going to go, we don't know. But it's just, Christy, I don't know about you, but I can't imagine, if you told me 6 months ago something like this was happening, I'd go, what? You got to be kidding. But no, here it is. And it ain't going away.
Yeah, it was even really up till 5 days after the first cases. I was out to dinner with a friend in Detroit, and we're like, well, this might get kind of weird. I mean, I didn't even really have a concept of what the entire shutdown would end up being. I think it's going to be interesting, and especially from a teaching perspective for you, and making the point about your students and maybe not even having the income to be able to get back into school, and then you being able to teach the way that you do. It's definitely something that is, it's like a week by week thing.
Oh, absolutely. And every place I turn, I'm seeing another evidence of something where it's got to turn to somebody's life upside down. Everybody from Disney, right? You'd think Disney, this totally unassailable empire. Well, wait a minute. They got the theme parks closed. They got ESPN. Hey, there ain't no sports. They got the cruise line. Oh, good luck there. Yeah. And TV and film production shut down. So that's mighty Disney. Everything from that to my corned beef place on the corner to you name it. I don't think anybody is going to come out of this thing unscathed. Nobody.
Let me ask you this, Tim. What do you think about the role of local news now, local journalism? We've seen a tremendous turn back. People are now consuming local news, especially television ratings are up. People are consuming news online like never before. Do you think, and again, in an industry that is struggling or can't figure out how to monetize it, what do you think the change in habit of consumerism of information is going to be coming out of this?
You know what? That's a great question. And if I knew the answer to that, I would be the smartest guy in the world.
And we'd be millionaires, right?
We'd be millionaires, right?
It's on the road.
But if you think about Gannett, which owns the Detroit Free Press, okay, they're operating, skeleton staff to begin with. A quarter of the staff at any good time, any time is furloughed. Mm-hmm. But their advertising is dried up because, wait a minute, if you're a car dealership, you're going to be spending that kind of money now at this point? No,
you can't sell cars.
You can't sell, open. Right? You can't do anything. So the money going into Gannett to finance this is drying up. At the same time, I think you need more than ever expert information. So in other words, somebody like you or somebody like, Stephen, or Nolan, somebody like that, somebody who's actually been doing this for decades, has developed that craft. We need people knowing what they're talking about, more than ever, as opposed to, well, let's just turn on Facebook and see what it turns up. That just ain't going to work.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be fascinating. And if there's going to be the funding there to be able to support that kind of experienced work. So, all right, Tim Kiska, it's always great to see you. Hey, what are you delving into next for the podcast?
We're working on a couple things. One is we're doing the Underground Railroad. We're doing another one on jazz in Detroit and how that works. And we've got about 8 other things on the plate, including, I think, if we can get some people together for this profile of Lottie the Body, who was a great burlesque queen here in metropolitan Detroit, well, across the country from metropolitan Detroit. Burlesque, by the way, not necessarily meaning, you know, I mean, that's a different thing. It's not, but anyhow, so we're doing a variety of things. And,
yeah, and she just passed away.
She did about
recently.
2 to 3 weeks ago. Yep.
Yeah, and we actually, so Bill, who you work with, Kubota, did a great feature on her while she was still with us last summer, and took her back to the place that she worked. And yeah, so I'll be really interested to hear the podcast on that one.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing.
All right. Well, Tim, be well.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, and keep us posted on all your work. Okay.
And if you need me, I'm around.
You got it. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.